So, we're talking about World War II. December 5th, December 7th, 1941.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember it very well.
Do you remember when you heard the news?
Yeah. It was in the afternoon, on the Sunday afternoon. I guess it's about 2 o'clock or so before we heard it on the radio. And I remember the guy who made the announcement was we called them radio announcers. And his name was John Daly. And we were listening to some kind of program in the afternoon. We had the radio was powered by a battery. We didn't have electricity in the house and had just a regular automobile battery. And we heard the news, and it seemed very, very important. So most people didn't know where Pearl Harbor was, and they didn't know until the newspapers told them where it was and showed them little maps and so forth. And I had turned 16 in October, and that was on December the 7th, and of course they began to wonder, who would have to go and who would be drafted and who wouldn't. And they had already been drafting some, but their age limit was up in the 20s, I think, before they drafted them, unless they took them when they were, I think maybe as low as 17, but they had to volunteer. And then later on, shortly after that, they started drafting them at 18.
Yeah.
So when I was drafted, I was one of the few thousand people, I guess, that were drafted into the Marine Corps. I actually went through the draft board recruiting, or the draft board process, and we left Lexington sometime in November after I had turned 18 in October, and we came to Cincinnati in one of those Army green school buses. I think there was 100 of us, and just about all of us passed.
Past the physical?
Yeah, just, I think maybe there might have been one or two who didn't pass the physical. But then out of the 100, they put 2 of us in the Marine Corps.
Out of 100?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So,
We went through the induction process at what was then the Gibson Hotel in downtown Cincinnati. It was a real nice hotel. We stayed in the hotel, and they gave us our meals and everything.
did you travel by yourself, or with your family members with you? Or just you?
No, I went by myself.
You received notice of your draft in the mail, or?
In the mail.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my mother and father went to the draft board and asked them if they'd defer me until I finished high school, and the draft board said no. So, and that was a real bad time, because they were needing real men real bad, and they were having high casualties in the Pacific. I think it was about the time, well, they had already gone through Guadalcanal, I believe, but then I think Tawara was close by, close at hand. So that meant they needed people. We call it cannon fodder.
Cannon fodder, yeah.
We said we were cannon fodder, so.
So you already knew that it was pretty grim fighting?
Oh, yeah, it was, yeah, we read accounts of it in the newspapers, and it wasn't very good, and showed pictures, and they never did really show the worst part of it at all, and even when they got to Okinawa, they didn't show the worst part of it.
Right. Prior to the Pearl Harbor bombing, had you followed the war overseas at all, on the radio?
I had followed it some. I can remember reading stories in the paper about the German Luftwaffe bombing London, and the terrible time they were having in London. And sometimes it looked like that they were going to, the Germans and the Nazis were going to take London, but Churchill was able to inspire the British people, and he held them off. He was able to hold them off.
So you didn't really have any inclination that the U.S. would be drawn into the war before the bombing of Pearl Harbor? Were you completely surprised that the U.S. was?
Yeah, Pearl Harbor was a surprise, because most of the concentration had been, well, practically all of it had been in the Atlantic, in Europe. There was very little about the Pacific, and that was, when you think back about it, that was kind of strange, because there was some conditions in the Pacific that were very, very dangerous, you know. And but that's the way it was reported in the press and on the radio. Of course, we didn't have television, but that's the way it was reported. Usually, just Europe.
So yeah. So if the U.S. was going to be attacked, you thought it would be from Germany, right?
Dad,
Japan.
where's the T-Shores hot rod? Dad, where's the T-Shores hot rod?
I don't know. You didn't take it?
Yeah.
They're up on the where the lawnmower keys were.
What?
Up where I keep the tractor keys.
Tractor keys?
Yeah. So you went to Cincinnati and took your physical,
Yeah,
passed the physical.
yeah.
What kind of, what would your family think, your mom and dad think of you going into the war? They
Well,
proud or fearful?
Well, they were kind of worried, you know, they didn't say very much, but they were worried, and kind of an interesting story about taking the physical. You're in a great big room, it's a big ballroom, like at the Gibson Hotel. Everybody was in a kind of in a single row. You went from station to station, and that's after the doctors had examined you, and you went through the physical exam and so forth, and then you had to go to 2 or 3 different people. They were usually sergeants or something like that, and always ask you a bunch of questions, and I walked up to this guy, and he said, well, he didn't say it that way, he just said, well, what do you want to be in? And I really hadn't thought much about it. And I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, well, that's what I said, I hadn't thought much about it. Well, he shuffled through some papers there. He said, well, looks like you make a pretty good Marine. Get in that line over there. And there was no line there. I was the only guy in the line. and I began to wonder what's going on here. So when they got through, there was another fellow they put there. And the amusing thing about it was, when we went back to Lexington, they gave me actually typewritten orders with my name as acting PFC, and that I was in charge of this other guy, and they gave his name to make sure that he got to Paris Island, South Carolina with me on, it was about December the 15th, somewhere in the middle of December, like that. And then when I got to Paris Island, I had to turn in my papers, my orders, and that was the end of my military command.
Who was this other guy? Did you know him?
I didn't know him. I don't remember his name. I never saw him anymore after that.
So after that, you go back home and you deploy to Paris Island for boot camp?
Well,
or is it?
That was when we went to Paris Island, when we got to Paris Island. And then that was boot camp from there until we...
But from Cincinnati, did you go back home or did you go right to Paris Island?
Yeah, from Cincinnati I went back home and had about maybe 3 or 4 weeks before I had to report. And then when it came time for me to leave to report, we went to the train station in Lexington, and then I got on a train at Lexington, and then we went on the train. The train took us to Cincinnati, and we had to change trains at Union Station. And Union Station then was just gobs of people all the time. It was just like you go to a baseball or football game, just people all over the place.
Union Terminal?
Yeah.
And then from there, that was...
Then from there, we went on the train to Paris Island, South Carolina. That's where I had my boot camp. And we went, I can remember staying overnight in Atlanta, Georgia, slept on a cot in a hotel or something. And we got up early next morning, about daybreak, and they gave us breakfast, and then from there we went on to Paris Island, which Paris Island today is right near Hilton Head,
Mhm.
but we didn't know Hilton Head,
Didn't exist.
there was no Hilton
Yeah.
Head then.
So it was all by train.
Right, it was all by train.
And you're introduced to the Marines, I guess. It's pretty intense from the beginning.
Yeah, it was, we got off the train and got on a bus, and we had to go on the bus over to Paris Island. And when we got off the bus, we could see these people doing this marching, and the drill instructors were drilling them and various things like that. And we began to, wonder what was in store for us.
Yeah. So boot camp was pretty much breaking you down, building you back up.
Yeah, but most people didn't like boot camp. I don't know of anybody that really liked it, but they knew it was something they had to endure, and most people realized that it was really for their benefit. And afterwards, I would say that boot camp was the best training I ever had. It equipped me more going through combat than anything. It was just
Mentally and physically.
yeah. It was just real good.
How long did it last?
Mhm.
How long did boot camp last?
We went there in about the middle of December, and it was sometime in February when it ended. And they had shortened it about 2 or 3 weeks because they wanted to get people through quicker.
Yeah.
There was some of the things that others did in boot camp that we didn't get to do. We just did very little of it. I can remember one thing in particular. They said that we got less of than you would normally get, and that was swimming. And we did some, but not very much.
Did you write letters back home often in camp?
Well,
Or did you have time?
in boot camp, I wrote, I guess, about once a week. And
Did they write letters to you?
yeah, my parents did.
Lois or?
I got, and Lois, I got letters, but mostly it was from my parents, and occasionally I would get a letter from somebody. But I don't know, a lot of people didn't write letters then.
Did you, at the end of boot camp, did you feel confident about going into battle? Did you know what you're getting into?
Well, at the end of boot camp, we got, I think, a 10-day furlough. That means we had to travel to home and then back to home, back to the camp where we were going within that 10 days. So it was about 3 days, at least 2 days going home
On a train or a bus?
on the bus. And then it was at least 2 days going back to Camp June. That's where I was sent back to. And so you had 4 or 5 days that you had to travel within that time, and so that really left you about 5 days at home.
You spent that time at home just
Yeah,
resting.
yeah.
Did you know where you were going exactly, or you ever heard of this place called Okinawa?
No, I didn't. We didn't have any idea about Okinawa because I was sent back to Camp in June. That's in North Carolina. And then I did some training there. And then from there, I went to Norfolk, Virginia. And then I went around went the long way to the Pacific. I went around through the Panama Canal. Most people went to the West Coast and left from the West Coast. But they sent us from Norfolk down through the Panama Canal and then on out into the Pacific Ocean and then to the Hawaiian Islands. And then we landed at Pearl Harbor in the Hawaiian Islands. And I was there for a little while, maybe 2 weeks.
Did you train more there?
And then from there I went to the island of Kauai in the Hawaiian Islands and spent more time there training on an anti-aircraft gun. That's what I trained on. Most of the time was an anti-aircraft gun, a 20 millimeter. That's a small caliber anti-aircraft. You've seen them on board ships where they are like this and they're swinging them around. Well, that's a 20 millimeter anti-aircraft gun, and that's what I trained on in the Hawaiian Islands. And then when we left the Hawaiian Islands, we left in, I think it was the 1st of March of 1945. We didn't know where we were going until we were approaching Okinawa, and they told us where we were going and told us about Okinawa. And they really didn't know a whole lot about it, but they told us what they knew. I can remember one thing they told us about. They had a lot of snakes and stuff like that. I never did see a snake on Okinawa.
Yeah, there was a certain legging they created for the snakes.
Yeah.
They ended up not even using them.
Yeah. And they told us to expect heavy casualties. And we did expect that. They told us to expect 80 to 85% casualty rate.
Right.
That was very, very high. Highest it had ever been. So we landed on Okinawa on April 1st, and that was Easter Sunday at that time, and it was also April Fool's Day. And we expected to be just mowed down.
Like Iwo Jima.
Yeah, but we expected to even be worse than Iwo Jima. But and they told us it'd even be worse than Iwo Jima.
Were you aware of Iwo Jima?
Yeah. But then nothing happened. We landed and and we had secured an airfield in less than 12 hours, we had secured an airfield. They had two big airfields on Okinawa. One was named Kadena, because I think we landed right near Kadena, and the other was named Yontan, and that was further south. But when we landed at Kadena, we secured that in just a matter of a few hours, and we couldn't figure it out, you know, but they kept telling us, don't worry, they're waiting for you.
Yeah.
So, so there were some in our outfit who had some experience already. They went through some other battles in the Pacific. Some of the old timers had went through Guadalcanal even. And the only thing that kind of shook us up when we first landed, or shortly after we landed, was we were kind of figuring out what to do. When you see these movies made about the war, and I'm talking about a movie, I'm not talking about a documentary, but they show you, it's shown like everybody knows exactly what to do and where they're going. It's not that way at all. You have to,
Pretty chaotic.
right, you have to kind of figure out what the situation is, you have to determine what the terrain is, whether it's level or hilly or the big gullies or what. And so we were trying to figure that out, and there was a lot of aircraft flying around, and we didn't pay much attention to it. But then somebody noticed that there was this one particular aircraft sounded different from the rest, and somebody said something about it. We looked up, and it was a Japanese Zero, and he dropped a bomb right down right near us on the beach. And it was a dud, thank heavens, because if it hadn't been, it'd probably been the end of us right there. But it was a dud, and didn't do anything except just spray sand all over the place. And we watched him, and we went right on out in the ocean, over the bay there. Then he went right up on top of a ship, and then just dived right down on it. And it was one of those kamikaze planes.
How big was the bomb?
We don't know. It was
Just something the same?
yeah.
So the U.S. had bombed Okinawa for months prior to your landing. Did you see any evidence?
They had started bombing Okinawa, and it was around the 1st of March, sometime in March. They bombed it for almost a month.
Did you see evidence of that?
Oh yes, it was almost leveled. I mean, as far as buildings and stuff like that was concerned. And they had a lot of civilians in Okinawa, and we felt so sorry for them because they were scared to death of us.
Because of the propaganda?
Yeah, the Japanese had made them so.
They were described as being the nicest people
you'd
ever meet.
Yeah, they were nice people.
Do you remember any encounters with the civilians?
Well, we had one amusing encounter one time. Don't remember what we were doing, but anyway, we were on a kind of a road like, it wasn't an asphalt or concrete road, it was a kind of dirt-like road, and there was equipment around and everything. And we noticed these little children. And we could make friends with the children real easy. And they would come up, they'd try to talk with us, you know, some of them, after they realized we wasn't going to hurt them. And with these children was a young girl. We thought she was a young girl. We thought maybe she was 12 or no older than 16 years old or anything. And some of the guys were making remarks and stuff, you know, like you can imagine what they'd be making. And,
Yeah.
and she came up and started, the kids were kind of talking with us and gathering around, and we'd always try to find candy bars to give the kids, and they liked that, you know. And somebody said something to her, and she said something back in perfect English, and that kind of stunned everybody because
They didn't think she knew.
yeah, she answered in perfect English. And we found out, she told us that she had graduated from the University of Hawaii and was a school teacher there in Okinawa. That's why she was with these young children.
You remember your first encounter with the Japs? First resistance? Other than that
Oh, yeah.
airplane that dropped the Dutch?
Yeah, they, well, I guess the Marines had to go north after we landed. We had to go north and secure the northern end. And they thought there would be heavy fighting on the northern end, and there wasn't very much fighting on the northern end. I don't know why they. There was in a few cases, but at that particular time, I wasn't involved in the heavy fighting. There was some others were, but I wasn't. I really didn't experience it until toward the end of April 1945. We had kept hearing rumors about how bad it was on the southern end of the island, and that's where the army was. And we kept hearing that they were really taking a beating there, and finally we were ordered to go to the southern end of the island. And then after we got there, it took us quite a while to get there. But after we got there, we began to encounter a lot of resistance because they were in those caves. They had dug all kinds of caves, and they had fixed up their living quarters, their command post, everything was in those caves. And that was why we had such trouble on the southern end, because we couldn't get them out. I doubt if we would ever been able to get them out if it hadn't been for the use of flamethrowers. That's probably the biggest thing that got them out.
Going into Okinawa, did you know that they would be in they had these caves? They had some intelligence that they were...
No.
'Cause on the other island, I think, Guadalcanal, they had dug up they were in caves.
Yeah. Well, they told us expect them to be some in caves, and the odd thing about it was, they thought it would be on the northern end, but it was different. It wasn't. It was on the southern end, and that's why our intelligence really wasn't that very good. They just didn't know that much about it. That was all. And then, it was just from then on, from as far as we were concerned, from then on until the end of the war was over. I mean, till the island was secured, which was on June the 21st, I believe, all through May until it was secured on June 21st. It was all unbelievable. It's just hard to describe it. And it rained almost the whole month of May. It rained almost all the time, and the mud got so bad. Lots of times you just couldn't you could hardly even walk in it sometimes. And some of those tanks and even the Amtraks would get bogged down, and they couldn't move. And it was just unbelievable.
You were in the 1st Marines
Yeah.
Division. How many soldiers did you typically move around? How many soldiers did you typically move around with, or did that change?
It kind of changed all the time, but usually you were in a company, and then our platoon or something. A platoon was the smallest unit. Then the company was next, and then the regiment and stuff like that. The division was the largest part.
Right. Your
Division usually was about 10,000. And our company was, I think usually I think the company was about 400 or 500, something like that. But that didn't mean that they always had that many people, because sometimes they were real low on people,
Yeah.
because there was a lot of casualties and stuff. And I'm just here by the grace of God. That's all I can say.
What kind of gear did you typically walk around with? Besides your rifle?
I walked around with rifles, mortars, 60mm mortar. That's the smallest one. That means you're right up rather close. 81mm mortar meant that you were back further, but the range of the 81 was longer, of course, than the 60mm. Then you had machine guns. Then you had the Browning automatic rifles, which were deadly. And
That was your M1
we had the M1s.
with the bayonet on here?
Yeah. Some had the carbine. That was a smaller rifle. It wasn't very effective. No one wanted it really, but sometimes they had to take it. And we had the flamethrowers. They were very effective. We had the M1 rifle, which is very effective.
That's what you learned to shoot in the boot camp.
When I went through boot camp, everybody had to qualify. If you didn't qualify, you didn't get out of boot camp. They told us that occasionally there was, on a very, very rare occasion, some people didn't qualify, and they had to go to the rifle range until they did qualify. But normally you went through the rifle range and everybody qualified. And you had 3 qualifications. You had expert, you had sharpshooter, and then you had what was called a rifleman. And I qualified as sharpshooter. I think 2 points in qualifying as an expert rifleman. And then I think there was one guy that qualified as an expert rifleman, and 2 of us qualified as sharpshooters, and the rest of them were riflemen.
Do you remember the first shot you took?
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah,
Is that when you were heading south?
yeah. I remember I got a black eye, partial black eye, because
The recoil?
I fired and I didn't have it against my shoulder right, and it kind of recoiled and hit me up here right along there.
Yeah. So you're heading south, and that's when you run into resistance?
Oh yeah, it was unbelievable resistance, and
Just artillery going off everywhere?
artillery. They'd come out of those caves and fire their artillery. Everything they had was in those caves, and they had them. They were in the Japanese general they had there must have been a genius in figuring out defensive operations, because he had it figured down to where he thought that he could just annihilate us, and he came close to doing it, but
That they were described as a vicious enemy?
yeah,
You
they were.
remember any?
They just were determined they weren't going to give up. They knew the next place that we went would be Japan itself.
They knew it was the last stand.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you see any particular examples of their viciousness or?
Oh, yeah.
Especially at nighttime, they got.
That was, they were real good at night. And we had to be on our toes, and lots of times you didn't get any sleep. And it was usually raining, and mud and water, and you always had your foxhole was always had water in it. You had to try to get the water out.
Yeah.
And sometimes just to get a little nap or something, you just had to take it in the water in the foxhole.
Is it typically one man per foxhole? Or?
Yeah. Sometimes there was 2, but most of the time there was 1.
During the night, they didn't stop.
No,
Continued artillery, sneak attacks.
Yeah, they tried to.
More mind games than anything.
Yeah, they were very good at it, but because we had never really experienced any training at night, and they apparently had. They were very good at it. And to me, the real heroes, a lot of times in those cases, were those corpsmen. They were what were called, they would call them medics today, but we called them corpsmen because they were in the Navy,
Yeah.
and they were assigned to the Marines. They were attached to the Marine Corps, but they were still in the Navy, and they called them corpsmen. And they were really good, just unbelievable.
As far as retrieving injured Marines,
Right,
fixing them up.
right. They would crawl on their bellies for long ways to get an injured person back or to give him treatment. We had a guy that won the Silver Star in our outfit. He was a corpsman. That was about, I think it's about the third highest honor you can get. The highest is a Medal of Honor, Congressional Medal of Honor. And then the next one might have been the Silver Star. And after the Silver Star comes the Bronze Star. Seemed like there was one other right below the Congressional Medal of Honor, but anyway, it was a high honor because he had saved quite a few people and went through all kinds of high risk situations to save them.
Did you have any significant injuries yourself other than
I
black
just
eye?
had a little shrapnel.
Yeah. So you're heading south towards, I guess you're going towards Fury Castle? Do you remember that particular battle? Or
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was,
Fury Castle was up on a hill.
yeah. It was kind of a Japanese, well, not a Japanese, it was an Okinawa landmark, kind of a shrine,
Right.
right? And then that area where it was all leveled off in kind of a level plain-like. And there was two areas. One was called Wana Ridge and Wana Draw. And we called them Death Valleys because the casualty rates were so high and you had no cover hardly because there was only plain and you just practically didn't have any cover at all.
How long did that battle last? Almost weeks?
It was practically the whole month of May.
Yeah. So what, during, after experiencing the battle, what particular training do you feel was the most beneficial that you received?
Okay.
The,
There's no question about it.
the rifle training? Or, do they teach you any particular skills that based on what they had learned in previous Japanese encounters?
No,
Blue,
not really.
Guadalcanal?
They didn't have time, and they couldn't take the time because they needed men. They couldn't take the time to train you like they really should. Interesting thing about Okinawa, the general in charge of it was General Buckner, and he had been in charge of the Aleutian Islands up near Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
And the Aleutian Islands was the only territory that belonged to the United States that the Japanese occupied during World War II. And the planners in Washington, D.C. had expected the Japanese to really do be concentrating more in the Aleutian Islands than they did anywhere else, but it didn't turn out that way. And he was in charge of the operation up there, and they took it eventually in a matter of about couple of weeks or something. And the interesting thing about General Buckner was that he was highly regarded in the Army. He was an Army general. He wasn't a Marine Corps general. And what was interesting was that he was in his 60s. And his father had been a Civil War general in the Confederate Army. And when he was born, his father was 60-some years old when he was born. So that's why his father was in the Confederate Army as a general, and then he was a general in World War II. And he was killed. He was the highest ranking officer killed in World War II. He was a lieutenant general. And he was killed on June 18th. That was 3 days before the island was secured. And I can remember when he was killed, we weren't very far away. A Japanese mortar had hit a kind of a small hillside like with rocks, and had coral rocks and everything in it, and hit it. A Japanese mortar hit that, and it broke it all up, and shrapnel come back and hit him in the chest and killed him, and he died within about 10 minutes. And then he was succeeded by a Marine general. A Marine general was second in charge, and his name, he was a major general, and his name was Roy Geiger. And he was, in our opinion, he was really one of the unsung heroes of World War II, because he'd been through a lot of battles in the Pacific, and he's the only general in the entire war. He was actually a pilot in an air wing, that's what he was, and he was in charge of a Marine air wing, and then they put him in charge of the Marine operation, the whole operation on Okinawa after Buckner was killed, and he was the only general in the whole war that had commanded a division and an air wing at the same time.
The first Marines were commanded by a Hispanic, right? Naval. The first Marine division itself.
It was by a guy named.
Did I say that right? Naval.
Yeah, he was.
Did you ever see him? Or?
No, we never did see him. I think I might have seen him one time, but you saw different people you didn't know who were. Our closest guy we had in command was a lieutenant colonel. He was a lieutenant colonel. Let's see, O'Connor, I believe was his name. He was Irishman. You could tell he was Irish. He was red-faced all the time.
Before the vicious fighting in the South, you didn't get much resistance. What was your typical day? What did you eat for breakfast, lunch, or dinner?
We didn't.
If you had a typical day?
Well, that was really one of our biggest gripes, our food. We didn't get much food. We just had rations.
K rations?
Well, at first, we didn't even have K rations. We had what were called C rations. They were in those little cans. And then we got K rations, which were a little bit better, and they were in kind of little boxes like. And we went, I can remember going somebody was talking about it. We went for 2 weeks, I think, without a hot meal. And then that meal consisted of a stew and 2 pieces of bread. And that was one of our biggest gripes, is that we just didn't get very much food.
When you weren't fighting, from what I read, you're transporting ammunition, boxes of equipment,
Yeah, we had.
unloading ships and trucks.
Yeah, you had those trucks, and you'd have you had load, unload. And I remember one of the best pieces of equipment we ever had was that Dodge Power Wagon. We rode around in those a lot. We didn't ride around in Jeeps. Mostly officers rode around in Jeeps. We didn't ride around in Jeeps.
Was there you have a lot of tank support?
Yeah, we had the tanks were very helpful. They finally put flamethrowers in those tanks, and tanks would give us protection, and we would stay close to the tanks as we could, and to the side or behind, to any way to get protection from enemy fire.
Did you get a lot of support from the air, C4, the Corsairs?
Yeah, the Marine Corps and Navy were very good. They were excellent. Most of the pilots were Marine Corps pilots, and they were in those Corsairs. That was a superb plane for fighting the
So
Japanese.
They could fly really low.
Yeah, they
strafe.
could fly low and strafe, and
They could hold more armaments than the
Yeah,
B-29 from what
Japanese hated them because there was 2 things that the Japanese feared more than anything. They feared a lot of stuff, but they feared that Corsair plane because they called it Whistling Death. It had kind of a whistling sound to it as it came in, strafing and stuff. And then they said that a Marine and his rifle was very dangerous too.
So, June 21st, the island was secured?
Yeah, and that one was secured on June 21st, and now that meant that normal operations, combat operations, stopped for the Japanese and for us. But that didn't mean that you were entirely safe, because there were still Japanese on the island, hiding out in the islands in different locations. Some of them were still even in caves. And some guys would go out on the island, kind of looking around, see what they could find and stuff like that, for souvenirs.
Scavenger hunt, yeah.
And they'd get killed, they'd shoot them. The Japanese would see them, and they would take them out right there.
By this time, the Japanese generals had committed Harry.
Yeah, he had been in command of what was equivalent to the West Point in Japan. He had been in command of that. Before he went into the military, he was a school teacher, and he was very good. He was highly respected and very good. And then he finally realized that the jig was up, so he didn't surrender himself. He went off to one of those kind of cliff-like mountains, and he didn't jump off like they did on some islands, but he committed hara-kiri on one of those mountains. He and most of his commanding officers.
So from June until, well, August 6th is when they bombed here.
Yeah, we went from June the 21st. After say maybe a couple of weeks, they began to give us different assignments. And I remember they put me and some other guys down on an airfield, Yontan airfield.
Okay.
When it was officially over, we really didn't know what we were going to do. At least we were not told, and I doubt if anybody else knew, because see, they didn't drop the atomic bomb until August.
Right.
So we had July there, and everything was just kind of in limbo.
July 2nd was the official surrender date, I think.
Yeah, that was the official date, but actually it was over on
June
21st. But they put us in the middle of an airfield, big airfield. It was a big one, and they told us that we were there, and we were on a machine gun, 50 caliber machine gun, and they told us to be on the lookout. They would notify us, but they thought the Japanese might try to retake the island, or at least part of it, and especially the airfields, because that's what they wanted to control so much. And but they didn't, so we just stayed there, and that's about all we did until after they dropped the atomic bomb. And then, of course, the war was over, then declared over.
That was August 6th.
That was early August, and then that left us in limbo again. We didn't quite know what we were going to do after that. There was all kinds of rumors and what we call scuttlebutt, people going back home, and only those that went back home right there off of Okinawa were those that had quite a bit of time in. And I didn't have that much time in, and they put everybody on a point system. You had your points were determined by how long you had been in, and how much combat you had been in and stuff like that. So sometime in September, I guess it's about the middle of September, they told us that we were going to China. We'd be going to China. And we before the war was over, we thought we were going to Japan, because that's what we'd been told, and that's what they had planned on, was an invasion of Japan.
Well, some troops were actually sent to Guam to train for Japan, weren't they?
Uh,
Some of the troops were sent to Guam.
yeah, some of them were, but we were right there, and if we were supposed to, the plans were, before the war was over, for us to invade Japan on November the 1st. But we didn't do that, so when the war was over, that left all of those troops in northern China that had been there since 1937. And we had to go there and what was called relieve the Japanese troops there for the Chinese. And I can remember it very well. Just before we left, we had the typhoon. It was terrible.
Did you have any warning of the typhoon?
No, none whatsoever. We were sleeping in a tent one night, one of these tents that had about 5 or 6 cots in them, just a makeshift tent that you set up. And all of a sudden in the morning, about, I guess it must have been about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, the whole tent was just swept away. And there we were. It was pouring down the rain and everything, and we didn't know what happened, so we got up and we soon discovered what happened. You know, ships out in the bay were turned up on the sides and everything. It was a wreck. It was really a bad storm. Some of the natives said it was one of the worst they've ever had. So we didn't know, we'd never experienced it before, but they called them typhoons then.
How long did it last?
It lasted one whole night, just about. And then 2 or 3 days later, we were shipped out to China. Went to China. We weren't very far from China in the first place. It only took us about 3 days to get there. And then when we got there, we got on trucks. We had a whole convoy of trucks, and the major, where we were going, which is a major city in northern China, it was called Tianjin then. It's called Tai-Chin or something like that now. When they changed the language to Mandarin, they changed the name of it, the spelling. But anyway, we went on in these trucks, this convoy, and I guess it was probably 30 miles or so from where we got off the ship, the port, and then we unloaded our trucks, and then we lined up and marched down through the main thoroughfare of this city, Tianjin, and it was just Chinese all over the place. Must have been hundreds of thousands of them, just all over the place.
From what I read, they treated you like heroes, right?
Yeah, and they were waving at us and cheering us and everything. And then we went to where our quarters were. They were supposed to be, and it was had been a Japanese high school, and that's where our quarters were. We stayed there, and then we did some training on mortars, and then we did some other training. We went to Peking one time on a convoy, and we were attacked by Chinese communists.
Hmm.
And that's what we had. The Japanese weren't any problem. It was Chinese communists that were the problem then. Then we stood guard duty in different places. I can remember one of the bleakest Christmases I ever had in my life was there in 1945, and on Christmas Day I had to go out to an ammunition dump and do guard duty, and we did guard duty in 4-hour shifts. So it came, my time was from about 12 to 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And we'd have, somebody would pick us up in one of these Dodge Power Wagons and drive us to our location. And then you had to walk around this great big ammunition dump and by yourself. And I'd always thought that was the craziest thing I ever heard of, because if they anybody wanted to blow it up, they could slip in. What good is one guy going to do?
Yeah.
Walking around some big ammunition dump like that by yourself, you know. So then I also stood guard duty at another place where I used to stand out front, and you'd have to check people who came in or went out or anything like that. And there wasn't very many who came in, and none of the Japanese ever wanted to come out, but there was a Japanese soldier who would come out and talk with me almost every day. And he spoke perfect English. His rank was a sergeant. And he'd come out and he'd talk with me, and we'd talk about different things. And he'd ask me about the United States, and then he'd tell me about Japan and things like that during the war. And then one day he came out and he had something in his hand wrapped in cellophane paper, like white Christmas paper, you know. And he said, "I have something here that I'd like to give you." So he just kind of opened it up like, and then pulled it up and showed it to me, and there was a Japanese flag that was in its original wrapper. So he gave it to me, and I still have it today.
Quite a gesture from a Japanese soldier, was it? Were you surprised by that?
Yeah, I was a little surprised, yeah. I was first thing that surprised me was how well he could speak English. He spoke English very well. And he was very well educated. And then second thing that surprised me was that how much he knew about the United States and stuff like that. How much he knew about almost, the whole world. He had a very good education. And then it surprised me when he gave me this flag, and I've always wished that we had been able to keep in touch with each other, but we never did.
There's some writings on the flag. Did you ever figure out what they
Yeah,
were?
no, I never did figure out what they were. He told me at the time, but I don't remember what it was.
So were your encounters with the Japanese in China, were they just resigned to defeat? Were they bitter? Were they,
The Japanese,
yeah, compared to what you experienced on Okinawa, they had to be.
they weren't there. They weren't very bitter. In on Okinawa, they were terrible.
Right.
Most of them were. But they were conditioned to be that way. That's the way they fought, you know. But in northern China, they had occupied that territory since 1937, and really they were in lots of places they were despised by the Chinese. They absolutely despised by them, and that's why they didn't want a reason why they wouldn't go out among the Japanese population. Because if they had gone out, I imagine they'd probably been killed or something. And one of the most amusing things that I can remember in my life was you always have somebody who's kind of a clown, like, you know,
Yeah.
in your outfit. And we would go out and there'd be somebody to get the interest of the Chinese and stuff like that. They'd go out in the street or a lot or someplace, and they'd start looking up, you know, and just looking around. And then soon a lot of people would be gathering around, and they'd be looking, and pretty soon you'd have a whole bunch of people just gathered around, just looking, you know, what was going on. And you'd think there was something up there, but really there was nothing. It was just somebody doing that, and then all these other people would follow.
Yeah.
And then finally the Chinese would catch on. Then they'd start laughing, and then they'd say, clap their hands and say, "Marine very goody, Marine very goody."
But looking back on the battle itself, was there ever a time when you thought the U.S. might lose that battle on Okinawa?
Yeah. It was very discouraging for most of me. And if we hadn't had those flamethrowers, I doubt if we'd ever, you know, because they could, if the flamethrower, if he was an individual operating a flamethrower, he could, if he had the protection of a tank or something like that, he could get up close enough to where he could put that thing in those caves. And once you did that, you just literally fried those people in there. And then the tanks, they finally put flamethrowers on the tanks too, and that helped a lot. But
Yeah.
it was, they were just so embedded in those caves. It was unbelievable. Just,
I read about a lot of resentment between the Marines and the Army, because the Marines are always cleaning up the Army's mess. Did you feel that way, or
sometimes, on a few occasions, they kind of fought a little bit different.
they had better living quarters and everything?
The
There
Army
was a lot of
did.
resentment.
The Army did,
Right.
yeah, the Army did. But they had better living quarters,
Better
better
equipment.
food, better clothing and everything. But we were very short and stuff like that. That's one reason why these Seabees liked us all the time. We were big buddies of the Seabees because the Seabees, see, they built the buildings and the roads and stuff like that.
They're Navy guys.
Airfields and they knew, the Seabees knew that we didn't have what the Army had, so they would, Seabees were actually a part of the Navy.
Right.
And they would always have plenty of food and everything, and they would invite us to eat with them and stuff like that. And
In your opinion, what was the decisive factor in U.S. being victorious in Okinawa? Sheer will or
just
numbers?
the first, they had the equipment, had the arms to do it. Then they had just had the sheer determination. That was all.
So looking back, you were a foot soldier and pretty much came out of the war unscathed. Maybe some shrapnel. Do you feel lucky?
Oh, definitely. I just, like I said before, you just wonder why that you come out. For some of us, there was others too, but why you come out with practically unscathed, and
Right.
then you had people that it affected mentally. We had people who would, what we call, crack up, because of
Battle fatigue, they called it.
battle fatigue. We had a major. He cracked up. He was a real good guy, real good officer, and he just went bad as a fruitcake. And then we had a captain who committed suicide, and different things happened. And
I read where a lot of the leaders most of the troops didn't know who their leader was because they were killed so often.
yeah,
The Japanese looked for the leaders.
yeah, they would try to figure out who it was, and lieutenants, they were picked off real quick.
Do you remember where you were when you heard the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima?
Yeah, I was in that airfield.
Did you have any inkling that something like that would
We
happen?
didn't have any idea whatsoever. None whatsoever. We were right in the middle of the airfield. Kadena, and I can remember some people firing their machine guns, which was stupid, plain stupid, because they could have killed somebody.
Did you have an idea that would mean the end of the war?
Yeah. In fact, I guess they got the word from Washington or wherever they sent out the word that the war was probably over. It really wasn't over until they dropped the second one. That was on Nagasaki. And that was about a week, I guess week, something like that after. And that was the final factor, determining factor. But I know one thing, it saved thousands of lives because the Japanese were training small children with bamboo spears and everything like that.
So you went to China, and you were there at least through Christmas. When did you leave China?
I left China in right around latter part of March of 1946. Finally got to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, somewhere around in first week in April. Then I was there a few days and went through the processing center, and then I was discharged and went home.
How did it feel to be on U.S. soil again? Had to be a relief.
It was good. I've been overseas. Let's see, I went overseas in I've been there about, let's see, I left in 44 and early part of 44. So I got back in 46, about 2 years overseas.
You take a train from Camp Lejeune, or you take a bus?
To Camp Lejeune.
To Camp Lejeune to Lexington?
No, we came to, from China, we came to San Diego. Then we left San Diego and came to Camp Lejeune on the train. And then from Camp Lejeune, I caught the bus from Camp Lejeune to Lexington.
So who was there to greet you at the bus station?
Hmm?
Who was there to greet you at the bus station?
Nobody.
Nobody?
I got in. It was in the night when I got in.
Yeah.
It was about midnight when I got in.
So, did you find it hard to adjust to regular life coming from the battle conditions on Okinawa?
A little bit.
Living in a hole and
Yeah.
basically
Yeah.
fighting for your life every day.
Right. A little bit was. But you just try to put it all behind and forget about it and go on.
How did the people treat you when you came back? Did they have any idea what went on over there? Or most of the news was filtered down.
They treated me all right, but I didn't think I was treated any different from anybody else.
Anybody that you knew in Lexington, that you went to school with, were they lost in the war? Or?
There was a couple in the high school. There was, I think, 2 in our class that were killed, but they were in the Army. They were in Europe.
Europe?
Yeah. But just seemed like when the war was over, people were interested in getting on with their lives and trying to find something to do and a place to live. I can remember one big problem was housing. Housing conditions weren't very good at all because they just didn't have enough housing. None had been built for 4 or 5 years. And you couldn't buy a lot of things because they hadn't been manufactured, hadn't been making.
You came back, you still hadn't finished high school, right?
Well, what I did, they offered, if you took a test, and if you made a certain score on the test, then they would issue you a diploma or certificate of high school graduation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I did. That's what a lot of us did. I can remember some of us, we took one class just to kind of fresh up, you know. Then there were several in there who, that's what they were doing, was taking the class just to kind of freshen up and take this test to get this certificate.
So with what's going on today, do you feel any attachment to the Marines in Iraq and the Middle East?
Yeah, I feel quite a bit, yeah.
Different kind of war, but
Different war,
same kind of enemy.
different equipment, different enemy. You have far superior equipment than we had. Far superior clothing. Everything is a lot better in terms of equipment and supplies.
Looking back, if you, being a soldier in anywhere in the World War II, if you would have, heard politicians being against the war and
There wasn't
media
any.
against the
There
war.
wasn't any. During World War II, there was. I can remember very well when Congress, after Pearl Harbor was attacked, just in a couple of days, Congress declared war, and there was only one person that voted against going to war, and that was a woman. She was the only at that time. She was the only woman member of the House of Representatives, and she was from Montana, and she voted against going to war.
But if you had had the same kind of ambiguity about the war as we have here now, back then, how would that have made you feel as a soldier, putting your life on the line every day?
It wouldn't have been very good for morale. Not at all, because it would have been, for the people in command of the operations, it was a terrible problem for morale.
Is there anything else you want to say? Thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, I'm just glad to be back.
I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.